I traveled home for a weekend a couple of summers ago. I entered my sister's home and was amazed by a flurry of activity. My sisters and my Aunt Alexandra were canning, and you should have seen the recipes that they came up with. The one that stuck out in my mind was for pickles, and I want to share that with you today. Here are my sterilized jars, and I'll start with a batch of 6 jars because I've got 6 positions in this canning pot in which I can place the jars. So we begin by dropping 8 or 10 black peppercorns into each jar. And they're not crushed nor are they run through a pepper mill. They're whole black peppercorns. Next, I've taken sliced garlic. And this is simply cloves of garlic. You slice them, no uniform size. I usually put about 5 or 6 pieces of garlic in each jar. And now some fresh dill. Dill weed and little pieces of dill will really give it an attractive appearance. And you know I'm always big on presentation. On now to the pickles. These are the first cucumbers of the season, and I've cut them into quarters. Later in the season, you'll get the very tiny ones, the farmer's last crop. That would be if you were making gherkins or very small dills. I usually put the large end of the cucumber down in first, and that will allow me then to fill the jar. And you've really got to jam these cucumbers in there. Another reason why I'm really forcing the cucumber into the jar is that once we add the brine, you want to make sure that the pickles don't come above the level of the brine. So there's 1 jar down, only about another 170 to go. Expect this to be a bit of a steamy effort. It's very hot in the kitchen, but that's part of the enjoyment of making pickles. You don't get anything without a little bit of hard work in this life. Next utensil we need is a pickling funnel, and this sits very snugly on top of the actual jar. Our saltwater brine contains 8 cups of water, 8 cups of a pickling vinegar, and 1 cup of coarse salt. And it's important that you keep this brine at a constant boil because you want it to be sterile throughout the process. So I'm just now ladling in the saltwater brine into our pickle jars. And you can see that about 3 ladles, 3 and a little bit, and I've got a jar that's filled with the brine. Now I go back and add just 1 piece of garlic right at the top of the jar. This is going to be a little present to the first person who opens the jar, and also a piece of dill. Whoever opens these jars are going to enjoy this little bit of added presentation. Now we're ready for a very critical part of the process. We're going to put the lids and the rings on top of the jars. This is a wonderful tool. It's just a lid lifter. It's a piece of plastic with a magnet on it. And nowadays you can purchase all kinds of things which will assist you in the process. The lids come out of the boiling water and place them on top of the jar, and then make sure you don't touch them. You can't involve your hands at all in this process. You want to keep this sterilization process completely undisturbed. And now we're on to the rings. So I take a pair of tongs, and now I start to place the rings on the top of each jar. And again, same process. You don't want to touch the lids or the rings or the jars. And this one I'll put on a little bit more. Great. Next tool is this tightener, and this fits around the neck of the jar, so it allows me to hold the jar. I'll take my little kitchen towel and I'll just turn these lids, and now the seal and the lid are both going down on the jar. Now we're ready to get our pickles pickling. I'm using another wonderful tool. This will allow me to lift up the jars and place them in the pot onto a rack. And I'll just hold the rack with my other hand, and I'm also going to put them in across from each other. This balances the ring and prevents it from falling into the pot. Now, if you're a little nervous about dealing with these hot liquids, go very slowly. In a few moments, you'll see how easy this is, and before you know it, you'll be pickling up a storm. This rack that's in the pot now can be brought down, which will submerge these pickles into the boiling water. And you'll see that the water level immediately comes up, and it's just under the lip of the cap. I'll cover this and allow it to boil. Well, the first batch is done, and this has taken about 5 minutes. And let me show you why I'm withdrawing them right now. I want to give you an idea of how to ensure that you're always going to have a crunchy pickle. Let me pull this one out and I'll put it on the counter so you can see. And specifically, I want you to look closely at this cucumber right here. You'll see there's still a bit of brilliant green, but around it is completely gray. Here's another example where you just see a bit of the brilliant green. My experience tells me that this is going to be a great batch of pickles. Now that the pickles have cooled, I give it a nice sharp turn to make sure it's tight. And this seal will also pop, which tells us that they've sealed. But there's another cool thing always in how you present them. This is how I send out Nick's Piks, with this wonderful brown butcher paper cover and a piece of raffia. I also make handmade labels identifying that this is the one and only Nick's Piks. I hope you do the same when you try your own pickling recipes. Enjoy.